even if you're the most responsive host with a 5-star property, you're going to get a problem guest eventually.
After hosting thousands of guests, we've seen it all. Things like surprise early arrivals to group chats gone wrong.
I am not being ridiculous.
So today we're breaking down the 6 types of guests that cause us the most headaches.
And how to handle each one without losing our minds. So let's get started.
Guest type number 1 is the doesn't look left or right guest. And this is hands down the most common problem guest that we see.
If we had to give this guest a rating where 1 is the least problematic and 10 is the most problematic, we'd probably rate this type a 3 or a 4.
They're generally fine. They're not necessarily damaging things or being rude. They just aren't bothering to look left or right before contacting you to ask you a question.
You'll get a question like, what's the door code? And right above in the message string, there is the door code along with a link to detailed check-in instructions.
Or they'll message you asking where the dishwasher pods are kept when they're conveniently stored under the kitchen sink where I'm pretty sure everyone keeps them.
We don't think these guests are trying to be difficult, but maybe they're distracted or tired from a long day of travel and they just want someone to tell them whatever the answer to their question is, like how to turn on the hot tub.
So this type of guest is less of a problem for us and more of a time sink with unnecessary questions. That's why we make sure that we have a thorough house manual for every property so that we can direct the guest back to that resource for their questions.
It usually only takes just one little polite nudge for them to realize that pretty much all of their questions could be answered by the information in that house manual.
It's not foolproof, but it does cut back on the back and forth and keeps us sane.
If you find yourself dealing with this type of guest often, it might make sense for you to make a couple quick replies to these frequently asked questions in your saved Airbnb messages.
We have a big portfolio of properties that we own or manage, and so it doesn't really make sense for us to create a quick reply for where everything is located in every different property. But we do have one that says you'll find a house manual on the kitchen counter that has important details about the house and also local recommendations.
So when a guest asks a question, you can type out a bit of a personalized response like normal and then tack on that quick reply at the end so you're not having to retype that part over and over again.
Life hacking, baby.
Guest number 2 is what we like to call the rule tester. So this is a person who is asking for a morning check-in instead of a 3 p.m. check-in, or asking to bring an additional person over your occupancy limit who maybe doesn't mind sleeping on the couch.
One of their favorite moves is checking the calendar and then saying, I see no one is staying after our stay. Could I get a late checkout?
This guest also loves asking for a discount. So they'll say things like, do you have any flexibility on price? Or we're only going to be using one of the bedrooms. Could you please waive the cleaning fee?
We've heard it all, and we don't blame guests for asking, but what we found in the past is that if you give an inch, then they'll often try and take a mile.
So we stick to our policies. If it is something that we offer, like an early check-in or a pet fee, then we make sure to communicate those costs clearly.
And if it's something that we don't allow, we just say no, kindly but firmly, because you don't have to apologize for having boundaries.
As for how these guests will fall on the problematic scale, it depends on what they're asking. If someone's asking for a morning check-in but they're willing to pay for it, that's easy, maybe 3 out of 10 just for the rescheduling efforts.
But the ones who push back on your fees or ask for things like free pool heating, those add up to more like an 8 out of 10.
And if you want to hear exactly how we respond to these types of tricky questions, then you'll want to make sure you're subscribed with your notifications turned on, because we have a whole video coming up that covers how we word our responses to some of these more nuanced guest interactions.
Guest type number 3 is the rule ignorer, and they're basically the rule tester's self-entitled big brother. This guest doesn't just test your boundaries, they tend to ignore them completely.
Excuse me, what boundaries?
This type of guest will show up 3 hours before check-in and just let themselves in, even if the cleaners are still there working.
Or they'll be fast asleep when the cleaners arrive on checkout day at 10 a.m.
And what really throws us all for a loop is when they open the door and say, come on in and get started, we just need an hour or so to pack up.
We've learned how to spot these guests, and you really have to be super clear and proactive. They can find check-in and check-out times on the listing before they booked, on their confirmation when they do complete the booking and in the check-in instructions, and again in the house manual.
But if we get the sense that the guest is going to show up early no matter what, then we'll wait to activate their door code or sending the door code via Airbnb messaging until right before the 3 p.m. check-in time.
We also send a message a day before departure reminding the guest that the checkout time is 10 a.m. and that we won't be able to offer a late checkout. And these are situations where we can't be flexible when we have something like a same-day turnover.
For safety reasons, we have standing instructions with our team that if a guest is still there after checkout time, they're not to go in. They just call us or text us and we will take it from there.
We've also learned the importance of keeping everything on the platform in the platform messaging. So we'll always start with a message to say, hey, you're in the house past checkout time. And then if you feel like you need to follow up after that with a text or a call, you can.
On the problem scale, this one is an 8 out of 10. Not necessarily malicious, but definitely disruptive. Guest type number 4 is the mob, and this one always makes me a little nervous.
The mob is usually a group of friends or maybe extended family traveling together, and instead of one point of contact, you get messages from a whole bunch of people.
One person is asking about early check-in, another one sends a message about pool heating, and the third one might text you to say they'd like to bring their dog.
It can get a little chaotic pretty fast, and it's hard to keep track of what inquiries have been handled and which ones haven't.
For that reason, we do try and keep all of our messaging on platform, but what really makes this guest tricky is when the tone starts to shift. If one person feels like their expectations are not being met, the whole group can come to their rescue.
This has recently gotten more problematic because now on an Airbnb reservation, the guest can add all of their members of their party to the group and everyone gets to see all the messages and participate.
I got your back 100%.
When a group gangs up on us on Airbnb messaging, it's usually late at night and it's pretty obvious that there's been some drinking involved.
This actually happened to us most recently at our castle property. There was a large group of women staying there and everything was fine the first night of their stay. And then the second night they became convinced that one of the showers wasn't hot.
We explained how the system worked. It's pretty straightforward, but it was pretty clear that they were not fully listening and they were just convinced that there was a problem.
Before we knew it, it turned into 5 or 6 people messaging us all at once and telling us how unacceptable this was, that this was an issue at the house and demanding we send a plumber immediately. And this was like at 6 p.m. on a Sunday.
The key to handling the mob is just to try and stay as calm and rational as possible and avoid going back and forth too much. Telling someone that their information is not correct when they're convinced otherwise is just going to escalate the situation.
In that case, we did call out our assistant to go over to the property. He confirmed that the shower did work, but they were still very rude and condescending to him too. They told him he wasn't a plumber, so he shouldn't be there, but he was just showing them how shower knobs work.
So we actually made a proactive call to Airbnb in that situation just to have everything on record. That way, if the guest ultimately left a bad review, our side of the story was already reported.
Keeping things documented is important. This proactive call isn't always necessary, but it is important and we find necessary to keep all the communications written and on the platform.
On the problem scale, we think that the angry mob is the absolute worst.
It's a 10 out of 10 problem when an alcohol-infused mob spirals into a full-on meltdown, and that kind of ruins the rest of our night.
Guest type number 5 is the I'm a host too guest. And this one can really go either way.
Sometimes they're amazing. They are very respectful, they take care of the houses and leave everything spotless.
And when these amazing ones find issues, they show us grace because they know how it goes. But on the other end of the spectrum, it doesn't go so well and they have a lot of opinions.
Think mid-stay messages like, I would never do X, Y, and Z at one of my properties, or this is how I tell my cleaner to handle things at my place.
I don't remember asking you for your input.
The best version of this guest is actually super helpful. They notice little things and they give thoughtful, private feedback, and that's really appreciated.
But the worst version, it's someone who owns a property. Maybe they don't even manage it themselves, but they're lined up and ready to tell you all the things that you're doing wrong.
I think the issue stems from the fact that regardless of their intentions, this I'm a host too guest automatically walks in with a sort of mental checklist in their head and they're evaluating from the very beginning. And this is different from someone who's there to just relax and enjoy the house.
We're guilty of evaluating too. It's hard not to when property management is such a big part of our lives. We usually just keep the feedback to ourselves unless something is broken or something that we genuinely feel like the host should know.
When it comes to handling the I'm a host too guests, we keep it professional and we don't feel the need to explain every little detail.
If the feedback is valid, we'll certainly take it into consideration, but if it's just someone who's nitpicking, then we let that go.
On the problem scale, this one ranges to a 2 to maybe a 4 out of 10. It's not usually a big issue, but it can be a little bit frustrating if they're unable to take off their host hat.
And finally, guest type number 6 is the person we call the how are you going to compensate me guest.
This is the guest who finds something, anything that they can find wrong in the house, and then immediately reaches out to you to say, so how are you going to make this right?
And look, we believe in making things right when there is something genuinely wrong, and we have sent credits. It's not something we do often. We look to offer real solutions and not just throw money at problems.
Most of the time, it's pretty obvious that this guest is fishing for money, and if they've done it to you, they're probably going to do it to other hosts too.
The way we handle this guest is to stay calm, respond to their questions in writing on the platform messaging, and start to ask clarifying questions about what the issue is. If someone text messages one of our phones, we will respond to that guest in Airbnb or the platform messaging to kind of bring things back to the platform.
If something is broken or not functional, we can usually respond pretty quickly by sending over a replacement item or calling a handyman if needed. But we don't automatically offer discounts if somebody complains.
On the problem scale, this one is a solid 9 out of 10, not just because they're trying to get money back from us, but because of the time and energy it takes to try and resolve this situation without overreacting.
If you end up hosting any of these types of problem guests, make sure that you're leaving an honest review after their stay so that other hosts can be fairly warned.
Let us know in the comments if you have another type of problem guest maybe we didn't mention, or let us know what type is your least favorite to host.
Be sure to check out all of the hosting resources we have linked in the description box. And for more hosting tips and tricks, we'll leave another video linked here on screen.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.